Welcome back, I'm Tedward, and today, thanks to the Depreciation Society and Garage 42 here in Acton, Massachusetts, we get the pleasure of testing out this 2008 Maserati Quattroporte Sport GTS. This is a pre-facelift version of the Italian four-door sports sedan. It's rear-wheel drive. It's powered by a Ferrari-derived 4.2-liter V8, naturally aspirated, of course. It makes around 400 horsepower, and it's mated, thankfully, to a ZF 6-speed automatic, not the earlier single-clutch nightmare that these debuted with the 4.2-liter. The earlier cars, however, with the 4.2-liter and the single clutch, have dry sump oiling systems, which actually makes them pretty darn cool. All of the automatics and later cars end up with a wet sump conversion, but it's an Italian powertrain with multiple variants. So I'm sure you'll find some creative ways to break this. This is the beauty of the Quattroporte, though, is that it has depreciated significantly. These originally cost over $100,000. Now they can be had with pretty good driver miles. This one only has about 30,000 miles for in the realm of $30,000, which is a steal considering that an E39 M5 if you had a 30,000 mile E39 M5, you'd probably be paying well over 50, 60, maybe even $100,000 depending on its condition and maintenance records. This is a steal, but it's also a Maserati. First off, let's talk about styling. I actually have always really enjoyed the style of this car. Some people like to poke fun at its snubby, stubby little nose, but I think this is aging really well. And in an age where we're basically losing shapes, everything is completely flat in the world of modern cars, having such a wild front fascia is actually pretty exciting to me. Being the GTS model, you get some cool little upgrades. First of all, it doesn't have the adaptive skyhook suspension, which you would think would be a downgrade, but honestly, it's better because it's going to handle better and you're going to have less to maintain and repair, because if you do have to repair that skyhook adaptive suspension, it's going to cost you quite a bit more corner to corner than this. You also get some fancy brakes with this dual cast rotor that was supposed to dissipate heat better and also prevent brake fade. You get these gorgeous wheels, and it sits a bit lower. So the stance of the GTS is the move. And this being the 5th generation of Quattroporte, which seems wild. These started in the early 60s, I believe 1963. And the Quattroporte existed because they needed Italian diplomats to be able to drive around or be driven around in an Italian mark and not in something German. Let's jump under the hood, because this was the real selling point of these cars back in the early 2000s. You were able to get essentially a Ferrari that could seat 5. And there you have it, our naturally aspirated V8. Now, if you're a Ferrari guy, you are going to bemoan this car because it's not your F430 engine. It's not some psycho, 9,000 RPM flat plane crank. Essentially, everything on this engine is different than you would have found on the F430. Not to mention, they never put a 4.7-liter version of this block in the Ferrari. So it is not just a Ferrari engine. But if you are a Ferrari collector or owner, this was a way to maintain your daily driver pedigree as an Italian sports car enthusiast while not having to drive your expensive mid-engine V8 collection in the snow or salt or crummy conditions. So the Quattroporte served two purposes. It was both a car that, as Doug DeMuro says, poor people think rich people own. That's kind of how he describes the mark of Maserati. Or it was the daily driver for someone who just loves Ferraris. So it can go both ways. But one thing we really need to appreciate this car is the engine placement. This engine is behind the front axle, so it definitely caters to a proper weight distribution. And in the cars with the Duo Select single clutch gearboxes, that gearbox was in the rear. There was a torque tube that went out to the back. So it was essentially doing its best to maintain a great weight distribution. However, with the ZF6s, they did put that transmission right up against the flywheel. So it's a normal configuration as we typically see. And in normal Maserati fashion, we've got these beautiful blue powder-coated valve covers. But what about its practicality? Let's take a look in the back. Now, what you'll notice on each door is there's actually two handles. You can pull this or this. This is the electronic release, and this is the manual mechanical release, which essentially tells you that they were expecting this electronic thing to fail, but they had your back. Inside, you've got room for 3 passengers in the rear. You've got Alcantara, and you have leather and carbon everywhere. So it is kind of nice because it does have nice touch points. The boot is big enough. You can definitely fit your bags in there, but it's not particularly deep. But as the owner says, this is a 4-body trunk, maybe small bodies. And then these are the stiffest pistons. It almost feels like you're forcing a motor, but this is not motorized, but it does have soft close, which is nice. In the back, get some snow off of my shoes. Reasonable space, but nothing too outrageous. It's definitely more focused for the front passengers, but you do have the rear sunshades. You can lock and unlock your doors back here. All of the plastic stuff is a little chintzy. It feels cheap. I'm honestly like a little afraid to move some of this stuff because it is, yeah, it's like literally falling apart. And this is a 30,000 mile example. This is a nice one. This is a good one. I mean, yes, there are lower mile ones, but this one has all the service records. It's been taken care of. But that's enough about that. Let's get it started up and take it for a drive. To start the Quattroporte, we have our Maserati blue key that sort of flips up, but you're going to have to help it out a little bit. This is a very cheap feeling key fob, and I would have been pretty disappointed if this was handed to me in period at the cost this was. Ignition on the column. In typical Ferrari fashion, you're going to see all the lights go off except for that check engine light until the very end. Ferraris do this. This is normal for Ferraris. They're basically going through all of their like OBD checks, and it's doing it without, there it goes, it's off. And it's basically like it's guilty until proven innocent. That's how check engine lights work in Ferrari world. We're going to need to go get a little fuel. We have our TPMS light flashing at me, and I just put air in the tires. I know these are good, but it sounds incredible. Let's go get some fuel, and we'll take it for a little spin. You can tell this is a 6-speed ZF car just by the shift lever. The Duo Select cars would have had this goofy little T-grip thing. So very normal stuff. We can turn off traction control. It just says ice. Let's see. Is this off? Okay, I think that's off. We do not have proper tires for this right now, so we are relying purely on what has been plowed. In the first couple of moments of driving this car, I'm kind of wondering why everyone's always complaining about these. I'm sure maintaining them is a pain, but this is actually really lovely. Really smooth power delivery. Little shimmy from the rear end on that upshift. They all came with limited slip differentials, which is lovely to make sure that it's putting that power down properly. Oh yeah. This is a killer daily, dude. This feels wonderful. I'm like, you know why? It's not because it's like the nicest car. There's a lot of cheap things on it that are annoying, and I'm sure maintaining it's annoying. However, this engine is so charming, and it really just makes me happy. Very few things exist like this. There are tons of faster cars. Like, lots of cars are faster than this today. But this one sounds the part. Let's go get some fuel on the other side of this rotary. Keep forgetting these are column mounted paddles. All right, let's get a quick score to 93. All fueled up, it took over 21 gallons, so it's a pretty big tank, and I annoyed a minivan who was waiting for the pump behind me because it didn't want to initially start when I when I turned the key. We got it started and we're off, but we're already experiencing Italian drama. Do you think I'm going to have to live with this Quattroporte for a little bit to really figure it out? Because I think when you jump into any Italian sports car, you're first enamored by sort of an emotional raw experience, whether it's because of its Pininfarina design or its exotic sounding engines. This has a grunt, a feel that definitely lets you know that there's something special going on. But there's always like the dark side of living with these cars. You'll start to find the failure points. You'll start to find where they went cheap on things. And I think you have to spend a few hundred miles in these cars to really feel that out and decide if it's for you. By today's standards, this is not a fast car. I don't know that it was necessarily even a fast car by its own day, because the E60 M5 would have been out around this time, and that would have had a 500 horsepower V10. And that sounded pretty darn cool too. Audi had their fast cars, but this was still more powerful than your average sedan. And honestly, it's pretty comfortable at speed. It feels like you could just take this at 160 miles an hour all over the place. I love having a 200 mile per hour speedometer. That makes me happy. BMW's had that as well. But yeah, overall, it really gives you sort of like a fun sensory experience. The downside is that when you have a company like Maserati, they're going to put some of their money into the powertrain, they're going to put some of their money into some of the exciting bits, but they're not necessarily going to know how to build an interior. Like, that passenger side airbag is really goofy looking. It's silly. This infotainment, we can forgive it because it's from a time, right? Not a big deal. But I do like that they put like carbon trim on places, because that would have felt pretty exciting in the day. Now, everything, you get a Mercedes GLA with carbon trim if you want. It's not that exciting, but in this period, you'd need to buy like a Maserati MC12 to have that kind of vibe and feeling, and I like that. That's fun. Also, this dashboard layout, pretty timeless. I mean, you've got a tachometer, a 7,500 RPM tach, you've got a 200 mile per hour speedo, everything's really easy to read. You've got the Maserati blue in the background with red needles. You know, a small LCD display in the middle just to give you some information, but you have your water temp and your fuel gauge. Like, it's not that wild, and it's nice because it's not going to age out. I mean, a lot of other things in this car will likely age out. Very touchy throttle in sport mode. All right, we're going to be good. We're not going to run it. Oh, full send. Oh, Escalade V. What a monster. All right, we got to get our hands on one of those. When I was in college, there was a professor, Professor Norton, who owned an early Maserati Quattroporte. And I do believe his was one of the 4.2 liter dry sumps with the Duo Select, the single clutch automated gearbox. And I will tell you, as students, we lined up when he pulled in to campus. We wanted to see this car. We needed to hear this car. If you were so lucky to watch him start this thing, that was a big moment in your day. And you'd say, I saw the Quattroporte. I saw Norton's car. And it was a big deal that he owned it because he was like our favorite design professor. In fact, he was one of those professors who like literally wrote the book on mechanical engineering design. That was his deal. So he was one of those professors that absolutely had a career outside of professing. And when he wasn't teaching at the school, he was working with a certain razor blade manufacturer for men's grooming. You can guess who that might be. Anyway, I'll never forget, we had a project with him and he had something in his trunk. He had to give us some paperwork or something. And we walked out to his Maserati Quattroporte and he said, hang on, I've got it here. So he opened his trunk and all over the back of his trunk were razor blades. They had fallen out of their cases that he had them stored nicely in. And he said, oop, I guess I've been cornering a little too aggressively. And I remember that was very funny because it let us know that not only did he own this super cool Ferrari-derived V8 sports sedan, but that he whipped it hard, and we liked that very, very much. Those were our goals. And here I am driving a similar car to his and trying to imagine what that must have felt like in 2006, 2007. And I bet it was so much fun to be able to have a sort of practical thing that could do the things that some of his sports cars could do. And looking back at the knowledge we have now, sure, he probably took a $60,000 bath in depreciation that year, but you know, you've been there for a lot longer than me. I'll heed your kind flashes though. But having sold all the books on mechanical design and probably making a ton of money as a contractor for that company, that probably didn't matter to him. He was just having a good time. And in Top Gear, when they put this up against the Rapide and the Porsche Panamera, they chose this because I think it had more soul and it felt more together than maybe the Aston Martin. The Rapide, I love the Rapide. And they in fact share the same gearbox. The early Rapides with the 6 speeds have the same ZF as this. Fantastic. And the Porsche is objectively a better car in every sense of the word, but it's a little more sterile. Ferrari people love to say, oh, but it's not really a Ferrari. It's not really a Ferrari. And they're right. But are they? Because if it's not really a Ferrari, why is everything so sticky? That is the mark of a Ferrari. Sticky buttons. And when you get sticky buttons in your 458 Italia or your 360 or your F430, whatever, it costs like $4,000 to replace all those buttons. It's very expensive. So, you know, you got sticky buttons in this Maserati. It feels like a Ferrari in a lot of ways. And it's funny, it's almost all of the real things that a Ferrari owner would go through. It's just that you would probably approach those things faster because you're going to drive this more. You're likely going to put like real miles on a Quattroporte. You would likely encounter more maintenance issues on a Quattroporte because you're going to put like 60, 70,000 miles on it than you would in your F430 where you may only put like 1,000 to 2,000 miles a year on it. I always thought of this as kind of a big car back in the day, but now, I mean, cars are so enormous now. This got smaller. It shrunk. It feels appropriate. It feels like an appropriate size vehicle. And I'm really into this suspension. It allows for a bit of body roll. It allows me to kind of feel out what's going to happen. And yeah, it's 40 degrees. It's winter. We've got salt on the roads. We can't exactly go pitch this car on max performance summer tires into a corner. But I'm going to in the near future, once it's spring, once it's nice out again. And I think we got to give this car a little bit of credit because it really did put Maserati back on the American map. Prior to this car, people thought of Maseratis in the United States by the biturbo, the biturbo. A terrible car, like by most objective standards, not a good car. And this car came out, and yes, it's expensive, it's not perfect, it's not really a Ferrari, but it kind of made Maserati glamorous again. It was something that was in the driveways of wealthy people, even though now we think of Maseratis as a car that poor people think wealthy people drive. But still, it really did. And I think this car gave Maserati hope in terms of sales again. Where they're at now, maybe not the best spot, but I do think that there's something really special about having this NA V8 over its current situation where you've got the twin turbo V6, which again, objectively a faster car, but this car I think just had more soul. They also know better now. You know, if you're Maserati and you're putting cheap buttons and things in cars, well, shame on you, because you're fully aware of what the market expects from you. But back here, it was like a Hail Mary, like, let's get this car out there on this new platform with this new powertrain. Remember, this engine was also new at the time. And it was exciting, and it really did rev people up to get into something different. And I bet this car brought a lot of people into the Maserati brand for the very first time, especially in North America. Super smooth power delivery. I love it. I mean, the shifts, sure, it's a ZF6 from the early 2000s, but totally acceptable, which is probably not something you can say for the single clutches. Those were not acceptable in pretty much any form when it came to the M5, when it came to the Aston Martins, when it came to the Maseratis and Ferraris. But here we are. I'm kind of surprised at how easy this is to really play with. And I can't wait to take this on some little road trips in the summer to some fun roads, because I have a feeling that this is going to be this like odd thing that I didn't know I loved, that I'm like almost ashamed to love, because there's so much about this car that's wrong. There's so much about this car that is like cheap or not well thought of or weird. And yet, throttle, steering, brakes, power, it all feels really nice and natural. This is like a proper tactile thing. The way this Quattroporte handles tells me that Maserati wanted to succeed. The thought counts, guys. It matters. Maybe they didn't hit it, maybe they didn't nail it, but they put in the effort. Ooh, we're going that way. This is a weird turn. So I'm going to go bring this back to Garage 42 and kind of think about this, because this was not the take I was anticipating. I wasn't anticipating getting in and out of this car thinking, ooh, I like that. I thought it was gonna be a bit of a throwaway, and it's not. Does that mean I'm going to go spend money on one? Probably not. Probably not going to happen. However, I do think that if you're somebody with multiple cars, some eccentric taste, and you need something that is a little eccentric, a little different, a little over the top, and not bad, this might be the ticket. You just have to have a bit of a stomach for repairs. So thank you so much to the Depreciation Society for tossing me the keys. Thank you to Garage 42 in Acton, Massachusetts, where I store my cars, for popping this out of storage for me. And I'm sure Ryan's going to give this a nice bath to get all of the salt off of it. And thank you guys so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive. Have a safe and happy new year, and I will see you very soon in the next one.